Hello, fellow students of Jewish history. As we all watch the terrible events that are currently unfolding in Ukraine, I think it's important for us to recall that Jews have a very, very long and rich history in this region. And I've prepared a couple of videos already that point to the long Jewish history there. Today, what I'd like to do is to just give you a few biographical snippets of some historically significant Jews who have come from Ukraine. This video could be much longer than it actually is because there are literally hundreds, maybe thousands of really famous Jews who have come from Ukraine themselves or are of Ukrainian Jewish lineage. By the way, please don't write in the comment box, why didn't you include so-and-so? Why didn't you include this person? Because that's just going to make me feel guilty. I mean, there are literally hundreds of people that could have been included in this video. I just picked a handful that were really meaningful to me in particular. Some people are kind of surprised that I would portray life for Jews in Ukraine as anything except unrelenting suffering. And, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but the reality is that for the vast majority of the time that the Jews lived in Ukraine, they lived in a cultural symbiosis with their neighbors. Sometimes there was more strain, and sometimes, in fact, there was even peasant uprisings that resulted in Jewish deaths at the hand of Ukrainian antagonists. But there's also, hundreds and hundreds of years of relatively peaceful coexistence, as I've discussed in previous videos. I think it's hard for people to let go of that kind of reified mindset with regards to the experience of Jews in Ukraine. I'm certainly not giving Ukrainian history a free pass here. I think I know more than most people about the violence that was perpetrated against Jews in 1648, 1768, 1919, and of course in the Holocaust. However, when you look at the overarching amount of history that Jews have spent in Ukraine, it's easy to lose sight of the more quiet moments that dominated that long history. And by the way, some people say, well, what about Nazis in Ukraine? And they'll point to tiny examples, sometimes more significant, obviously during the Holocaust, of Ukrainians who supported more right-wing causes. It's a silly argument. You look at America, we've got Nazis here in the United States. We've got Nazis in virtually every country of the world. They tend to be tiny little fragments of the population. They tend to represent kind of like the QAnon supporting individuals who may band together and rant at passersby and things like that. We certainly don't condemn an entire society because of these tiny minorities, especially when that society has demonstrably taken steps to quell that kind of activity, which is not something that even America has done very well. At any rate, I want to focus here on Ukraine. Let's have a look at some of the significant Jews that have lived in this region. Here's a map just to recall what we're talking about when we say Ukraine. These are the contemporary political boundaries, although it's important to note that with the exception of a couple of points in this long history, Ukraine was not a titular nationality. I mean, they didn't have their own state that they could claim, this is our boundaries of our country and so on. Ukraine was typically dominated by other countries, and the ethno-linguistic population known today as Ukrainians often found themselves within, let's say, Poland or Russia in particular. Also, sometimes they were divided, meaning the western sections in particular found themselves under the Austrians or the Hungarians or the Poles, and the western group found themselves under the Russians, for example. If we go to the earliest point in Ukrainian history where we actually have named Jews, the 12th century stands out because there are two figures who belong to the Talmudic school of the Tosafists. These are very, very important thinkers who, circulated commentaries on the Talmud in particular. One is named Moshe of Kiev. He maintained correspondence with Rabbeinu Tam, one of the most famous of this school of scholars, also correspondence with Gaon Shmuel ben Ali of Baghdad. And there's another, Isaac of Chernihiv, sometimes recorded as Isaac of or Yitzchak of Chernigov, that would be the Russian pronunciation of the same place, also a 12th century figure who traveled to the west, to the Rhineland, and he became one of the students of Rabbi Yehuda HaChassid during the period of the Hasidei Ashkenaz. Here's what Ukraine looked like at that time. This is the period of Kiev and Rus, where it was centered in Kiev, which is sort of in the center of this map here, but extended really quite far north as well. There are many, many more famous Jewish names when you get to the 18th century in particular. That's because Ukraine has been absorbing over the following centuries hundreds and hundreds of Jews moving to Ukraine for reasons we discussed in a previous video. But briefly, anti-Semitic pressures from the West driving them out, and economic possibilities in the East drawing them in. And they live at this time under the auspices of the Polish-Lithuanian government, Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Here is what that massive state looked like in 1764. The Ukrainian part of it is sort of like the bottom section of the yellow map. You can see there that Kiev is just outside of it in the green part, which would have been part of Russia proper. Russian Jews, by the way, were barred from living in Russia from 1479 on. So all the Jews who are making their way to the east are kind of piling up in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, and many of them are settling in the southern half, which is represented by this yellow section. It is in this area that the Hasidic movement flourishes. The founder of the Hasidic movement, Rabbi Israel ben Eliezer, also known as the Baal Shem Tov, who lived from about 1700 to 1760, he came from the western region of Ukraine, from a town called Medjibozh, and one of his principal students, Dov Ber, the Maggid of Mezrich, came from the town Mezrich or Mezrichi. Many of the Hasidic dynasties that are still active today, like Chernobyl, Vizhnitz, Hornostaipel, Skvir, they all come from Ukraine. Famous Hasidic leaders like Elimelech of Lizhensk. I mean, Hasidism is overwhelmingly a Ukrainian phenomenon, particularly in the 18th century. This map here shows you from the beautiful historical atlas of Hasidism published by Princeton Press, the spread of Hasidism from Mezrich, from Western Ukraine, essentially. Perhaps the best-known Hasidic groups today, to look at some famous Ukrainian Hasidim, is the Breslov movement, for example, which has an annual pilgrimage to the city of Uman in Ukraine. Here you can have a look at where exactly Uman is. The Rebbe, Rebbe Nachman of Breslov, came originally from Medzhibizh, and he was active, of course, in Bratslav. That's where he gets named Nachman of Breslov. But he decided he wanted to be buried in Uman, largely because of the many graves of Jews who were victims of the Haidamach massacres of 1768. Another very important Hasidic leader from Ukraine is, of course, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, the seventh Rebbe of the Chabad movement. Although Chabad itself does not originate in Ukraine proper, the seventh Rebbe was born in Dnipro, then known as Yekaterinoslav, later known as Dnipropetrovsk. Now, what happens next in the overall development of the Jewish population there is in the late 18th century, the country of Poland is swallowed up by its neighbors, and Russia takes over the massive section of Ukrainian Jews. A smaller number of those Jews living in Ukrainian ethno-linguistic territory actually end up in Austria-Hungary, in Halicina or Galicia, but the majority of Jews end up in this region called the Pale of Settlement, which is where they were allowed to live under the Russian Tsars from Catherine II onward. And during this period of time, the 18th century and the 19th century, you have a tremendous flourishing of Jewish culture in all kinds of areas. Great writers like Sholem Aleichem, who pioneered Yiddish, and who was, of course, the author of the very successful later Broadway play and movie, Fiddler on the Roof. Isaac Babel, a great Russian stylist who wrote Red Cavalry and many other amazing works. And in Hebrew, Chaim Nachman Bialik, among so many others, who was really the poet laureate of the Jewish people for much of the early 20th century. In music, you see people like Vladimir Horowitz, the great pianist and composer, just incredible. Yossele Rosenblatt, a cantor whose nigunim are absolutely world famous. In science, you have Jews like Valdemar Hafkin, who was the man who developed the vaccine for cholera and for bubonic plague. He's a national hero in India. Here's a sample of a stamp that has his face on it because of the tremendous things he did for public health in India. Political leaders, Leon Trotsky, of course, the leader of the Red Army, one of the leaders of the Soviet Union. Golda Meir, also from Kiev. Here is actually a plaque that is posted in her honor at her birthplace in Kiev. She went on, of course, to be the Prime Minister of Israel. So, we could go on and on. I just really stopped at the early 20th century, but there's so many great Jews who have done fantastic things, who were either born in Ukraine or who are descended from Ukrainian Jews. It is a place of tremendous history for Jews, and we should bear that in mind and hope that the people of Ukraine are spared the suffering that they're currently enduring as soon as possible. Thank you very much for watching this brief video.